aspect about your file. So when the underwriter's asking me to get things from you or whatever, don't get upset. We are trying to understand what your situation, what you got going on, and how we can get it to fit within the guidance for the type of loan that you're getting. Now, why do we decide to go one way or another? If you're a veteran, that's easy peasy. You're going to do a VA loan. But for the rest of you, how do I decide to recommend an FHA loan or a conventional loan? It does depend on what kind of money you're working with. It can depend on your income. Like, for example, if you are doing certain incentive programs where your income level, like Maryland Mortgage Program, your income is over where your overall credit profile looks like. And it could be your situation. I'll give you an example of a clear and defined example as to why we pick one versus the other. You have a bankruptcy. Your bankruptcy was discharged 3 years ago. HUD rules, bankruptcy needs 2 years wait period. So in other words, you would be eligible for financing after 2 years after a bankruptcy. Conventional is 4. So since you're at the 3-year mark, we would go FHA. That's a clear example. Next slide. Sure, we want to make sure we do fixed rate loans, no adjustable rate mortgages, okay? Please. Now, when you are doing your pre-approval, you should be providing documents to the lender so that they can review. Most of these bullet points are going to look very familiar to you because it's a lot of the same stuff that you have to provide to care of for your one-on-one. Also, it's a good idea if you have some specific stuff going on, like if you're a veteran, your certificate of eligibility, if you had a bankruptcy, meaning those documents, and if there's like child support, divorce decree, separation documents. Let's get those now before you go under contract, because once you go under contract, there's added pressure to provide information and documentation, and we don't want to be in a situation where you're under contract and you can't provide the documentation because you lost it or it's misplaced and you have to go to a third party and ask for it. Then once you go under contract, that means once the seller has accepted your offer, we would need a copy of the contract of sale and of course collecting the funds for the appraisal and credit report. Next slide. In addition to documentation, there's information we're going to need, and that would be how to contact your landlord, how to contact your employer, information about your assets. Sometimes bank statements don't necessarily have complete account information on there. If you own any other real estate, we need to know about that and what the disposition of the property is. Paid in full letters or zero statements that show that you have a zero balance. You may have paid off a collection, or it could be just you paid off some bills because you wanted to get rid of debt before you bought a house, but you did it last week. So it still shows up on your credit report as having a balance. So what we have to do is collect the documentation from the creditor that says you have a zero balance, and we also would need to see that it came out of your bank account. And then there are letters of explanation and supporting documentation. Throughout the process, from pre-approval all the way through the end, you may be asked to provide a letter of explanation from yourself or even from a third party. In some cases with Federal Home Loan Bank, if there's some little unique characteristics on your pay stub, it's got to come from your employer. So those letters of explanation and supporting documentation is not an unusual thing to be asked of. So if they do, don't be alarmed. It's just that we need the information to bring clarity to your file. Next slide. Now, once we've collected all this information, we're going to convert your pre-approval file to a live deal. You do that by going to the property information screen and drop in. You're by 123 Main Street in Randallstown, Maryland. Boom, you're a live deal. Now, a rule called TRID, that's a law, Total Rest Integrated Disclosure. We have to provide you with your disclosures and your loan estimate within 3 days of application, within 3 days of dropping that address in there. That is the document that gives you the line-by-line breakdown of what you're going to pay to complete the deal. It doesn't tell you what you need the day of closing. It tells you what you can expect to pay for the whole transaction. Okay? We go through painstaking efforts to make sure that those numbers are accurate. It's the same system. When we give you your worksheet, it's like a lot of the same numbers, so it shouldn't be too off. But we do have some wiggle room in some areas to be off by about 10% because Sometimes the title company you choose may have a little slightly variant number than what we estimated. And it also will have your APR shown on there, which is your annual percentage rate. That is different than your note rate. So let's just say, for example, you were quoted an interest rate of 5%. Your monthly payment is calculated based on 5% interest rate. That is what your note rate, that's what we're charging you. Your APR is a combination of the note rate and some of the line items from the loan estimate that are required as lenders pay to the lender in order to do the loan. It's very similar to, let's just say, for example, you have a friend that was going to fix your car for you. They're like a mechanic, they do a little side hustle on the weekend. And because y'all cool, he said, just give me $50. So that's his rate, okay? $50. But then you still got to go to AutoZone and get the stuff they need to fix your car. So we're going to charge you 5%, but guess what? I also need the appraisal and the credit report and tax service fee and the admin. I can't do the loan with any of those things. So those are tools, and that's the parts and liquids that we need to do the loan. Just like you got to go to Pep Boys and get all the stuff to your friend to fix your car. So your note rate may be $50 to fix your car, but you spend $600 at Pep Boys. Your APR to get car fixed is $650. That's basically how it functions. Okay. Next slide. This is an example of what it looks like. Kira's going to be sharing this with you so you can study that later. Next slide. The process. The loan process can take anywhere between 30 to 60 days depending on your circumstances. Again, you'll get the loan estimate within 3 days of application. One of the documents also in that package you're going to get is called an intent to proceed. Your file cannot move forward until you have signed off on the intent to proceed. Once we've collected all fees and documents from you, the loan officer will package your file to turn it into the processing center and get rolling on getting everything processed. And that's when your appraisal and your title work are ordered, and your file is off to the underwriter for initial review. Files are reviewed up front. Many of us do upfront underwriting so that we get a set of eyes on the file to see what we're working with and know that we're good. And then the underwriter will approve the loan, and it'll be approved subject to conditions. Those conditions are pretty lengthy because there are conditions that we have to do internally. Doesn't have anything to do with this stuff working in the background. Then there's conditions that we need, like the title work, the appraisal, your homeowner's insurance. Then there's borrower conditions. That's the ones that I hold in. What do I need from the borrower? What do you ask for? And so we'll work with you, the processor and the loan officer, on gathering those conditions up. Next slide. The processor will also be in the background working on your credit, history, employment, savings, assets, and affordability. So credit is, as a bank, we don't keep pulling your credit report. Credit report's only is good for 120 days. As long as we close before that credit report expires, I don't need to pull your credit again. But let's just say if you did have an item on your report and you paid it off, we have to order a credit supplement where the mortgage credit reporting company does an update for that particular line item to show that that bill has been paid off. They'll verify your rent history, employment, as far as verification of employment, getting updated bank statements from you to update your assets, or you may have to get, like say, I put a gift letter form in the file that you're going to get a gift from your grandparent, but we haven't documented the actual transfer, so we're putting that stuff. So we're working on collecting all that information, along with making sure that anything changed, make sure that nothing changed with your affordability. And then they pull all that stuff together, we send the file back to the underwriter for a final review so we can get the file fully approved. So we're going to go check, 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 check. And once all those things are checked off, it moves to the closing department. One of the things you should know also is sometimes when we have that initial review, then we get the documentation to address those items from the initial review. Sometimes that new documentation brings about new questions. So don't be surprised if they come back and say, hey, we got this, but what about that? Okay? Next slide. The appraisal report is one of the reports that comes in. That is performed to determine the market value of the home. In other words, Street is willing to pay X amount of dollars for the house. It is worth it. The assessed value that you see when you pull public records is a determination that's done by the State of Maryland Department of Assessment and Taxation to determine your property tax bill. Two different approaches to looking at the valuation of the property. So we've gone through average home buyer process, as I said in the early slides, 30 to 60 days from the time you go under contract. We've gotten our final approval. We're at closing. The closer for the lender will work with the title company to prepare your closing disclosure. Many of you will receive what we call the ICD, the initial closing disclosure, at least 3 days before closing. And you do have to acknowledge receipt of that document, at least by viewing it in that portal. If not, you need to sign it with the pen. If it's not viewed, then your closing will be delayed because under TRID, we have to document that you've seen those numbers several days before settlement. And as I said before, the closer from the title company and the lender will work together, going back and forth to balance the CD until they get the same result. Next slide. So some things you want to remember to do during the process. Keep your accounts current. Keep copies of your pay stubs, especially your pay stubs and bank statements, because sometimes we got to get updates from you during the process. And you want to keep all letters, any documents coming in about your finances, about student loans, about your credit cards. Keep that stuff in a safe, accessible place. So if it comes up for a copy, you can access it. You might want to also make sure like you are able to access. A lot of us use things online, right? So now they've got this face recognition, thumbprint recognition. You might need to make sure you know what your ID and password are, because if you can't, you may have, depending on how well versed you are with working with the technology, some of you need to go to an actual computer or laptop and pull documents to get to us. Speaking of which, you want to make sure that you send stuff to the lender as soon as possible. The longer you hold out, it can delay things. I had a situation this week. The seller, I needed a document from the seller, and they didn't give it to me until Wednesday. And then I got their realtor screaming and yelling at me why we can't close on Friday, because it needs to be reviewed, and that was holding things up. So you can't give something to someone on Wednesday and expect that everything's going to be fine to close on Friday. It doesn't work that way. So it's really important to, as soon as something is available to you, provide it as soon as possible. Stay in close communication with your lender. Call, text, email. Everybody, I'm like, I don't care if you send a courier pigeon. I know one loan officer is like, she does not do text messages. She's like, you want to talk to me, you pick up the phone and send me an email. So everybody has the little thing on how they work, but stay in communication with your lender and be open and transparent. If there's something going on, or you sense something is going to shift or go on with your file, let the lender know, okay, so you don't end up in a situation. Some things that you don't want to do on our next slide is, like, you don't want to go off and co-sign for anybody. You don't want to, and I'll just say, err on the side of caution. Anything that involves you pairing your name up with somebody else, just while you're in this season, just avoid it altogether. Now,